Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A ton of talk about this USC program in the transfer portal the last couple of days. We got a spring game to talk about on Saturday afternoon. And I'll tell you this, I am fired up to just talk some football with this USC program. And this USC spring game especially excites me because we spent so much time talking this USC program on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal. This is our first time to really see a lot of these players that we've talked about the last couple of months put on the USC helmet, put on the pads, and kind of show what they are going to mean to this program heading into 2024. Obviously, a completely revamped coaching staff. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the USC fans. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas as we talk to transfer portal, the recruiting trail, spring practice, that stuff means the world. It's no secret. I love talking this USC program. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some breakout players that you guys have for USC on Saturday. I'll give you guys some of mine. We'll chop it up in the comment section. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with, the most important position on the field. That's the quarterback spot. And talk about what we want to see from both Miller Moss and Jada Maiava. And yes, I'm a college football fan. I am tuning into this USC game, and I want to see the flash plays, the splash plays down the field. But if you're a USC fan and you're thinking about what do you want to see most from the quarterbacks, what do you want to come away from Saturday saying, yeah, I feel good about that? I think it's the command of the offense. We want to see the splash plays. We want to see them push the ball down the field. But if you're looking at Miller Moss, Jada Maiava, what do you want to see the most from them? You just want to see them play within this offense, have command of the offense, the ball coming out on time accurately to where it needs to go. And you look at Miller Moss and say, what is the thing we love about Miller Moss the most heading into 2024? It was the command of the offense that he showed against Louisville. And yeah, there's no secret about it. He is not as talented of a quarterback as Caleb Williams. But the one thing that we really loved about what we saw from Miller Moss, and sometimes at times didn't see enough of from USC in 2023, is just playing within this offense, taking what's there, letting Lincoln Riley scheme you up, and you just kind of make the throws and be that point guard of the offense. That's when this USC offense, it's at its best. And Miller Moss is a guy that against Louisville really showed that. Again, he made some really impressive throws. This is not me saying Miller Moss is not a talented quarterback, because he certainly is. But my favorite attribute about Miller Moss is how much command he has in the offense and how well he plays within the offense. And if there's one thing that I want to see from Miller Moss on Saturday afternoon, I want to see him continue to show that. The command, the poise that he has running this offense from both Miller Moss, Jada Maiava. That's what I'm looking at the most from the quarterback spot. Now, you look at the offensive talent that's around the quarterback. That's what fires you up the most. And I want to talk about my breakout player for Saturday, and that's going to be sophomore Quentin Joyner at the running back spot. You go back to when we talked about him committing to USC out of high school. This was a guy that we were all over, and he flashed as a freshman, didn't get a ton of opportunity because that running back room was quite good. You have Woody Marks. You kind of know what he's going to be. I'm excited to see Woody Marks and what he can do in the pass catching department. This was a guy that was really productive out of the backfield as a pass catcher at Mississippi State. I think he got a really good 1-2 in Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner. And I think Quentin Joyner kind of shows what he can do as a running back for this USC program in 2024. You go to the pass catchers, and I want to go to another breakout guy that I have, and that's Joey Olson, early enrollee, true freshman for this USC team. I had been maybe too vocal about having question marks about the tight end position, and a lot of you guys have pushed back in the comment section, which, by the way, I really do appreciate. I always learn a ton from you guys in the comment section. Joey Olson, as a true freshman, this is a guy that we're extremely excited about. Gets up to 250 pounds. A guy that ran an 11.2 in the 100-meter coming out of high school. You talk about matchup nightmare in terms of the size, the speed that he brings at that tight end position. It sounds like he's got a really good opportunity to be that tight end one. And I think what excites me the most is think you have a difference maker at tight end 1, which you haven't really had for USC during the first 2 years of this Lincoln Riley era. If Joey Olsen can emerge as that matchup nightmare difference maker at that tight end spot, I think that's huge for this USC offense. I also want to see how he inline blocks. That is probably the biggest question mark you have about true freshmen at the tight end position. Then you go to the wide receiver room and say, all right, we don't have any question marks about the talent in this room. I think the questions that you want to see are, how do we use these different combinations of wide receivers? Partially what excites me the most about this wide receiver room is not really just the raw talent, but how USC wide receiver room balances each other out and the amount of different bodies that can attack defenses in different ways, right? You got a guy like Zach Branch, who is just probably the most electric player in all of college football with the football in his hands. You have guys like Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane, who are just big bodies that can work vertically down the field. You have a guy like Mekhi Lemon, who I think is just probably the most well-rounded wide receiver in this room. And that's saying a lot, because this wide receiver room is awfully talented. I don't think there's a wide receiver that separates as well as Mekhi Lemon. So you have all of these wide receivers that can do different things. How does Lincoln Riley go about using these wide receivers? And specifically for me, I'm looking at Zachariah Branch as a guy that I want to see him more used as a true wide receiver. I feel like at times last year, Lincoln Riley used Zachariah Branch too much as kind of that gadget guy. And yes, do not get me wrong, I want to see the screens. I want to see the end arounds. I want to see Zachariah Branch get the football in a multitude of different ways. I also want to see him used as a wide receiver, because the juice that he has in terms of being able to create separation, having that long speed to potentially test teams vertically down the field, use Zachariah Branch as a true wide receiver, because I think he can be an elite true wide receiver as well. So many different weapons. I'm just excited to see how they decide to use those different weapons at that wide receiver spot. You go to the offensive line. This is probably where most of our eyeballs are going to be on during the spring game, where this is what I'm looking for. I feel pretty good about Elijah Page, Emmanuel Pregnon, Jonah at center, and Alani Noah at guard. You have question marks about the right tackle spot, and I think you have question marks about the depth of this offensive line. And so where I'm going to be looking at is a guy like Tobias Raymond, who's getting a ton of love during spring practice. He's all the way up to 300-plus pounds, a guy that came in as a 260-pound high school kid. What does some of that depth look like? Because you're going into the Big Ten, you got to make sure that you have 7-8 guys on the offensive line that you feel good about heading into 2024. I want to kind of figure out who are the names that we feel good about on the offensive line. So yes, I want to see those 4 guys that we just talked about just play well, like we know they will. But I'm more importantly kind of looking at the depth of that offensive line. Some of the guys in the 2 deep, are you going to be reliable for this USC program heading into 2024? And then you move to the defensive side of the football, and this is where you got to dig in. Before we get to any players, I think it's important to say, what does this D'Anton Lynn defense look like in terms of what are they going to try to do? It's probably you're not going to see the full playbook. You're going to see a vanilla version, but you want to see physicality. You want to see multiple sets, guys getting used in different ways. That's what excites me the most about D'Anton Lynn. You can talk about the X's and O's and how he completely revamped that UCLA defense last year. What I think was the real secret to why D'Anton Lynn is such an elite defensive coordinator is the different ways that he decides to use players, right? A guy like Eric Gentry, who is kind of a unicorn at that off-ball linebacker position, but a guy that can do so many different things. You talk about somebody that can get with the length he has, getting to throwing windows, a guy that potentially could be used as an edge rusher as well with the juice and length that he has. I look at Eric Gentry as a chess piece in this USC defense that was just not used the right way the last 2 years in this USC defense under Coach Grinch. How does Eric Gentry get used? You have a guy in Anthony Beavers who sounds like he's coming down to that off-ball linebacker spot. You're seeing D'Anton Lynn already start to kind of work his magic with how are we going to use guys in different ways to maximize the skill sets that they possess. That's the best attribute you could have from a defensive or offensive coordinator, where you look at these guys and say, yeah, this is the best way to use him. We're going to use him that way instead of just trying to put I'm going to try to get this one right, a square peg into a round hole. I think you're going to see a little bit of different use of personnel from Dan Lynn. Now, you get into the position groups, the defensive line, and we've had a lot of conversation about this and whether USC should be going after edge rushers. I love this group of edge rushers. You talk about Jamil Muhammad. Braylon Shelby is probably my breakout player. Nate Clifton, Anthony Lucas, Sam Green, Cam Fountain. It is absolutely loaded. That's a UCLA defense last year that was one of the best pass rush units that you saw in the country. I want to see what we saw from UCLA's defense last year. I want to see that in this USC defense. They got the personnel in my mind, especially at that edge rusher spot, to be an extremely disruptive defense. I want to see flashes of that on Saturday. The big question that we all have is the depth on the inside, right? We know what we have with Bear Alexander. What does Elijah Hughes look like going into year two, finally having that true interior defensive line body? A guy that honestly I thought played pretty well as a freshman, knowing damn well that physically he probably shouldn't have been playing that much. You have a guy in Jide Abasari who I am extremely excited about. You just take a look at him during spring practice and say, yeah, he looks to be a guy that can play early for USC. What does the depth look like on the inside of that defensive line? Are we putting Nate Clifton on the inside? Are we kicking Anthony Lucas down inside? Kind of that kind of conversation of how guys are getting used. How does the interior defensive line look? You look back at the linebackers. I just want to see Mason Cobb get back to form. That's the guy that I'm looking at. I feel really good about Easton Mascarenas-Arnold. I'm excited to see Eric Gentry used in different ways. Rayshawn Davis, another guy that played some quality football, but you look at Mason Cobb, I want to see the Mason Cobb that we all thought we would see in 2023. I want to see the Oklahoma State 2022 version of Mason Cobb. That's probably the question mark that I'm looking at most at that linebacker spot as we get that ad out. And then you look at the back end, you got a lot of new faces who I think are going to be very good. John Humphrey, DeCarlos Nicholson, Kamari Ramsey, N'Keal Arnold at the safety spot. There's a couple other guys that because you brought so many quality transfers in, I feel like kind of get lost in the shuffle. A guy like Prophet Brown, who might be your starting nickelback, he thought he played some really good football during that game against Louisville. I think this secondary has the personnel to be very good. Danton Lynn and Doug Belk, two guys that I really trust to use all that talent in the right way. I want to see where guys are playing, how they're looking, a little bit of a difference feel in terms of the coverage packages that we have. That's where my eyes are going to be on in the back end. I'm fired up about this one. If I had to give you guys my breakout performers, Quentin Joyner and Joey Olsen on the offensive side of the football. And then I'm going Braylon Shelby and Eric Gentry on the defensive side of the football. We'll hop on right after that USC game, talk about what we saw. Really excited for it again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.